Alright, I just felt like making a video to explain my views and what I believe to be the causes and what should be done about the lending scandal that has recently taken place in our government. In case you're not up to date on that, basically what happened was there were three major lending institutions, Fannie Mae, AIG, I forget the name of the other one, but there were three of them. They were fucking huge, and they were basically making loans to people with low interest teaser rate loans, and they would get these lower income people who clearly had no business making a loan of that nature to pay for houses and whatnot, mortgage loans. And they had these low interest rate loans, but then they raised the interest rates up astronomically so that these low income families couldn't afford to pay back the loans. And because these institutions made so many of these loans, and there were so many people who couldn't pay them back, they essentially went bankrupt, and now the government is saying it has to bail them out. My opinion on this matter is, well, this is stupid on the part of the government. We'll look at that later. First of all, the cause, many people are going to say because you have to excuse the camera for zooming in and out, by the way. I don't know why it does that, stupid. But anyways, the government, or many people are saying that because the markets were deregulated, this was the cause of this crisis, and that I don't believe that to be true in any case whatsoever. The real reason, I think, was mainly because of government intervention in the markets. The 1977 Community Reinvestment Act, which was passed under the Carter administration, which goes to show you how good liberalism is for the economy. But anyways, the 1977, Community Reinvestment Act, what that basically did was made it so that lending institutions would have to make loans without discriminating against lower income families, and so that they would, I mean, I don't know the exact language of the law, but basically its intention was so that lending institutions wouldn't specifically, discriminate against African American families, against lower income families, just because of their status. I will agree that is nothing but noble in intention. At the end of the day, it fucks us all over. For a big reason, is because this causes lending institutions to be forced by law to give loans to people who clearly cannot afford to pay the loans back. And this is wrong because if this law was never there in the first place, it would, the lending institutions would not have had to make these loans by law, and then there would be no problem because they would be making loans to people who clearly afford to pay them back. And this is all brought about by the socialist mentality in our country that, oh, everyone has the right to a house because Karl Marx says so in the Communist Manifesto. But that's a bunch of bullshit. You don't have a right to a home because the way I see it, rights are something that are inalienable and people are born with. And nobody pops out of their mother's cooter with a house. I mean, it's easy to see that. So, I mean, you have the right to liberty, you have the right to own property, yourself being your property. You have the right to liberty, not to be intruded upon by government unreasonably. And you have the right to, basically everything derives from property rights, but that's another discussion for another time. What we're talking about here is financial institutions, but basically the Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 caused these financial institutions to give loans to people who clearly could not afford to pay them back. So in this sense, government intervention, really fucked us over. And now the taxpayers are having to pay this all back. At my expense, at your expense, at everybody's expense. And I mean, and another thing, I read an article, I believe it was the Washington Post, and it said that the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, also pressured these financial institutions into making these loans. And I mean, clearly, if the government didn't have that agenda of socialism, that these financial institutions, they would have known. It's common sense not to give a loan out to somebody who cannot pay it back. That's just common sense, and they wouldn't have done that if the government wasn't making them. And a lot of people will blame about these low interest rates because that's what the loans did. They had low teaser rates, that they're called, so that the people were like, oh, 2%. I don't know the exact numbers, but just pulling this out of my ass. A 2% interest rate, whatever. Oh, cool. So they get the loan, but then skyrocket to 15%. Like I said, I don't know the numbers. I'm not an accountant, but I mean, I don't know. I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass here. But anyways, these rates would skyrocket, and many people blame that on the greed of the company and on the capitalism and the failure of the free market, blah, blah, blah. And that's not true. I mean, if you think about it, how is it in the company's interest to give out loans to people who can't afford to pay them back? It just doesn't make sense. It's stupidity. It's just liberal stupidity. And then, I mean, now I've explained to you why I think the cause of this, and there are other factors. I've read various sources that say the Federal Reserve monetary policy, their policy of inflation, causes this. I mean, I'm not a economist. I'm a math major, but not an economics major, so I'm not too well versed on that. But if you want to check that out, Blue Rockwell, Ron Paul, the Mises Institute, those are all great places that sort of thing interests you. And I'm pretty sure they're correct. They usually are. Call that blind faith, but whatever. Anyways, now we've discussed the cause. Now to discuss the proposed solution, which is that the government spends $700 billion regardless, an astronomically high amount of money to bail these companies out, and at the expense of the taxpayer, of me and you. We're going to have to pay for this, not the senators, not the company. This is just stupid. It gives business the impression that if they make bad decisions, which, like I said, this isn't the fault of the companies, but it gives people the impression, regardless of whether this is true or not, gives them the impression that, oh, I make a bad decision, the government's just going to be bail me out, so why am I make smart financial decisions, and the government's just going to, bail me out of this sticky situation. It gives that mentality for all business, and I mean, capitalism works best when it's competitive, and people have to make smart decisions, which tap into the benefit of the consumer. That's the way that things work. But with this sort of mentality, that's not going to happen. It's ridiculous. And I mean, even without getting into the consequences of not bailing these institutions out, which is the government saying if we don't, things are going to go in the shit. We'll have another Great Depression. Not even getting to the consequences, ethically, it's ridiculous from an ethical standpoint, it should not be doing this. We, the taxpayers, it's not our fault that the government forced these institutions to make these loans, therefore causing the institutions to fail. It's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's the government's fault. So what I think would be interesting is if instead the senators who voted to pass these bills into law, like the CRA Act of 1977, if they had to pay the $700 billion because they're the ones who caused this fiasco, I think that would, one, it would be hilarious, and two, it would drive a good point that they're the ones that caused it, they should pay that, but of course the Congress and the Senate aren't going to do that. But anyways, I mean, it's just ethically wrong that me and you, innocent people who had nothing to do with this, have to pay for the mistakes of the government. So just from an ethical standpoint, we shouldn't have to bail these companies out. Let them fail, let them learn their lesson, and let the market take care of it, because time and time again it's been proven economically and practically that the market will fix this. Another firm will come along, a responsible firm, and it'll buy out these other ones, and everything will be honky-dory. That's how it'll work. I mean, I'm not trying to make these lending institutions sound like little angels who did nothing wrong. I'm sure somewhere along the line they fucked up, but basically my point is the fault of government intervention. It's not the fault of the failure of the free market or whatever. And what we should do about it, we should just let the market take care of it. It's kind of like if you shake up a can of pop, shake it up a little bit and open the seal, it's going to spill, but it's not going to make a big mess. But the more you shake it up, eventually when you open it, it's going to explode, create a bigger mess and a bigger problem for everybody. So that's my thought on the financial crisis. If you watch the whole 9 minutes of this, wow, thank you very much. But yeah, I'll probably have more material sometime as soon as I think of